First, let me wish you a happy, problematic UU holiday. This is out of the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. Now the whole earth had one language and few words. And as people migrated in the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come and let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and therefore confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. And then over in the second chapter of Acts in the Christian Bible, the part of the story of Pentecost, which was a celebration that began following the resurrection. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in his own language. And they were amazed and wondered, saying, "Are not all of these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in his own native language? Parthians and Medes, Elamites, the residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretians and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God." And all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others, mocking, said, "They're just filled with new wine." That was probably true. This reading is from a 1981 edition of that old UU World, an article by Dr. G. Peter Fleck, who was very outstanding in the Meade Lombard School of Theology in those days, and a writer of several books. And he tells this story about a gathering at his house one evening. Some time ago, we had as our guests 2 young physicists who came to see us at the suggestion of one of our daughters, whose husband teaches chemistry at Cornell University. They told us they were doing research on the behavior of atomic particles in an ultra-cold environment, the kind of environment that was created for the first time in the 1920s by the Dutch Nobel Prize-winning physicist Kamerlingh Onnes. With the use of liquid helium, he succeeded in reaching temperatures close to absolute 0 point. Strange things happen at ultra-low temperatures when atomic turbulence that exists at higher temperatures is eliminated. I asked them to explain this, and this is what one of them said. When the thermodynamic turbulence is eliminated, other strange forces can be observed that regulate the behavior of the particles. For instance, if you have an electron here and another one there, the electron here behaves as if it knew what the electron there is doing. Now you're telling me a story, I interrupted. An as-if story. And he conceded, yes. But stories are the means by which one can think about these things and talk about them and explain them to others. In the end, you may get an equation, but that equation, in a way, is only shorthand for a story. What you are telling me then, I said, is that scientists speak in parables. And they agreed. What happens, I asked, if the scientist forgets that he speaks in parables and begins to believe that the parable is literally true? Puzzled facial expressions. I had to explain myself. I mean, what happens if the scientist one day disregards the as-if element and proclaims that the electron does not behave as if it knew what the other electron is doing, but that it actually knows what the other electron is doing? The scientists looked perplexed. Such absurdity apparently had never entered their minds. They politely inquired how I had arrived at this. Because, I said, that is what is happening in religion all the time. The story is taken literally. The parable is presented as being literally true. That is why in Europe the churches are empty, and why in this country they are more and more becoming the scene of mass infantilism. This is what Paul Tillich warned against when he observed that the first step toward the non-religion of the Western world was made by religion itself, when it defended its great symbols, not as symbols, but as literal stories. By then, it had already lost the battle. Since Tillich wrote these words, literalism has been embraced by tens of millions in this country. Nobody spoke for a while. We were all lost in thought. And after some time, I broke the silence. It seems to me, I said, that the story may well be the common denominator of science and religion. Only scientists know that the story is a story that points beyond itself to truth, and religion falls too often victim to the temptation to proclaim that the story is literal truth. That is why in our days science flourishes and religion is in trouble. Years ago, when the Kansas Board of Education decided to go crazy, a columnist for the Washington Post wrote this open letter as his column, addressed to the members of the Kansas Board of Education from God. Subject: regarding your decision to eliminate the teaching of evolution as science. Thank you for your support. Much obliged. Now go forth and multiply. Beget many children, and yea, your children shall beget children, and their children shall beget children, and their children's children after them. And in time the genes that have made you such pinheads will be eliminated through natural selection. Because that is how it works. Listen, I love all of my creatures equally and gave each his own special qualities to help him on earth. The horse I gave great strength, the antelope I gave great grace and speed, the dung beetle I gave great stupidity. So he doesn't realize he's a dung beetle. But man I gave a brain. Use it, okay? I admit I'm not perfect. I've made errors, armpit hair. What was I thinking? But do you Kansans seriously believe that I dropped 500 million-year-old trilobite skeletons all over my great green earth by mistake? What? I had a few lying around some previous creation in the Andromeda Galaxy and they fell through a hole in my pocket? You were supposed to find them. And once you found them, you were supposed to draw the appropriate intelligent conclusions. That's what I made you for, to think. The folks who wrote the Bible were smart and good people. Mostly they got it right, but there were glitches, imprecisions. For one thing, they said that Adam and Eve begat Cain and Abel, and then Cain begat Enoch. How in the world was that supposed to have happened? They left out Tiffany entirely. Well, they were also off a little bit on certain other elements of timing and sequence. So what? You guys were supposed to figure it all out for yourselves anyway. When you stumble over the truth, you're not supposed to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and proceed as nothing had happened. If you find a dinosaur's toe, you're not supposed to look for reasons to call it a croissant. You are not big, drooling idiots. Why do you think there are no fossilized human toes dating from 100 million years ago? Think about it. It's okay if you think. In fact, I prefer it. That's why I like Charlie Darwin. He was always a thinker, still is. He and I chat frequently. I know a lot of people figure that if man evolved from other organisms, it means I don't exist. I have to admit this is a reasonable assumption and a valid line of thought. I'm in favor of thought. I encourage you to pursue this concept with an open mind and see where it leads you. That's all I have to say right now, except that I'm really cheesed off at the laugh tracks on sitcoms and the NRA and people who make simple declarative sentences sound like questions. Wait, there's one more thing. Did you read the newspapers yesterday about how scientists in Australia dug up some rocks and found fossilized remains of life dating back further than ever before? Primitive, multi-celled animals on Earth nearly 3 billion years ago, when the planet was nothing but rolling muck and ice and fire. And inside those cells was DNA. Incredibly complex strands of chemicals laced together in a scheme so sophisticated no one yet understands exactly how it works. I wonder who could have thought of something like that back then. Just giving you something to gnaw on.
Well, I'm introducing a person to this church who probably needs no introduction. Most of you know Joe. Reverend Joe Adams. He was a former Methodist minister. He has been a Unitarian minister at the Great Church in Gray, Tennessee. He has been a newspaper editor and certainly a good friend to this church. But when I think about Joe, 2 words come to mind: conscience and courage. If you know Joe, you know that he is a man of conscience. He found himself in a situation where all the people around him did not believe as he believed. His father was a Methodist minister. His brothers are Methodist ministers still, and he was a Methodist minister. But he got to the point that his conscience would not allow him to continue. So he exhibited the courage of his own faith. And he went against everybody around him, his wife, his daughters, and everybody that loved him, to pursue what his conscience dictated. I'm very pleased that he's at our church, and I'm very pleased to call him friend. Joe?
Bob, I'm going to find it hard to go on after that. I was digging around in my mother's old cedar chest several years ago and found a picture of one of my Sunday school classes at Brentwood, Tennessee in the mid-30s. And in my hand was one of those little Sunday school story papers that were given to each child on Sunday morning. Some of you may have experienced that. I've thought a lot about those little folders here lately and tried to remember what they said. I was in my religious infancy then, and that is very important to the journey. Most of those little papers, as I recall, merely stated some basic Christian verity. And out of that memory mass of little papers comes one statement I will never forget. That basic first Sunday school lesson that said simply, God is love. I wonder sometimes these days, where did that truth go? In this day of angry religion and confrontation, where did that little Sunday school paper's truth go? And why must we virtually demand tragedy, sometimes to jerk us back to central, simple truth? Every one of the world's great religions at its best teaches peace and love and tolerance. So what happened? Where did it go? It appears Christianity and other major religions are caught up today in arguing about how many angels can stand on the head of a pin, while my little Sunday school paper lies languishing in the trash can, stating in eloquent and primeval form, God is love. I do my writing on a Macintosh computer. Near the bottom of the screen is an icon called trash. The icon looks like a trash can. And when I want to get rid of something, I take its icon and drag it to the trash and select empty trash from the menu, and it's gone. However, before it empties the trash, a dialog box appears asking in so many words, are you sure you want to do this? It makes you think. Life could use more of these little dialog boxes. Our society should certainly be asking this question, because we are dragging to the trash some things that shouldn't be dragged to the trash, things of vital, non-propaganda nature, and one of them is a true respect for religious freedom. We're living in an era when the meanest solutions to our problems are being fostered and suggested. Charity and understanding are out. Fascism is in. Social programs and entitlements are all of a sudden evil, proposed as the real causes of our economic deficits. Thus, fascism moves in to fill the void, and fascism is usually caused by fear and distortion. Have you noticed this spring that many of the political candidates have the same ad? They all sound alike. regardless of party, regardless of previous positions taken. It's sad and frightening. All of them seem to be trying to out-conservative each other. The fascist wing of the world's great religions are setting an agenda these days designed to spread terror, half-truths, and confusion. I remember a World Population Conference in Cairo a few years ago was messed up by sectarian and political violence. Doctors in family planning clinics have been murdered in the name of truth. South Dakota and Kansas have passed archaic legislation to, in effect, limit personal freedom. Issues dealing with sexuality and education seem to be at the center of these efforts. A two-bit politician by the name of McIntyre, a few years ago in Kingsport, entertained a gathering and referred to the separation of church and state as a mere cliche. That little idiot is just one of many. And so, joining my little Sunday school paper in the trash can is the Constitution. In the Tower of Pride and Prejudice, about which I read a few minutes ago from the 11th chapter of Genesis, we find an interesting ancient Hebrew story about two things: language differences and human pride and prejudice. Many scholars believe the story was generated by the Hebrews' period of exile in Babylon, where they were forced to confront other religions and cultures. Babel and Babylon are very similar words. Ancient literature is full of stories where people of the pre-scientific era tried in story form to explain things that are otherwise mysteries, such as, how did we get here? Why are we here? Why are there so many languages? Why are there so many races? And in the Old Testament, we find stories attempting to answer some of these questions. And the Tower of Babel is one such story. We now know that differences in language evolved over long periods of time. Therefore, to literalize this story is to ruin it. This story has nothing to do with scientific or historical accuracy, and such efforts drain the truth out of the story. Religion and Scripture are full of symbolic images, metaphor, and poetic expression. And when we mistake symbol for reality, we miss the whole point. I think the celebration of Easter is a case in point. Back of this story in Genesis lies profound insight. Differences in language and culture are a great source of trouble and pain in this world. They stand as symbols of division, suspicion, and hostility. And the world we're living in today is littered with numerous examples of this. In fact, almost every major current news story serves as an example. Once in a while, a nation or group will try to make themselves bigger and greater than they are or deserve to be. Thus, one of the primary troubles in the world is human pride. The exiled Hebrews saw some of the great towers of Babylon and also the ruins of some. Hence the symbolism of the story of Babel, a story about people trying to build a tower to the sky. And this forms a picture of what people have always tried to do. They thought that by their own devices they could reach the pinnacle of coveted importance and sit triumphantly on top of the world. Such as this always confuses things. Language not only turns to babble, everything else goes haywire. Even people speaking the same tongue fall out with each other, including professing Christians, Israelites, and Muslims. In this connection, I am deeply concerned these days about the Tower of Babel our own government is constructing these days. I read yesterday in the paper about the new embassy compound being built on the banks of the Tigris River in Baghdad. I think we're planning to stay there. This is a huge complex, larger than any other embassy compound in the world. Security at tops, built on several hundred acres. If that's not a Tower of Babel, I'm sadly confused. In the Acts of the Apostles by Luke, I read a story a while ago about the story of Pentecost, an event about the post-resurrection Jesus fellowship. People from many places, we are told, were gathered to hear the witness of the disciples of Jesus. And regardless of the apparent language differences, the spirit of the occasion permitted what seemed to be a miraculous understanding. Each one present understood the message in spite of language barriers. It was in this spirit and under these conditions the Christian religion began and continued. The point being that good religion cannot be bound by language, culture, nationality, or race. It never has been and has always seriously weakened itself when attempts were made to nationalize it, codify it, or threaten people with it. Here is a wonderful thing. Love and understanding are the greatest linguists in the world. They speak to every person of every nation, of every section, of every denomination, I hope, in their own tongue. What we have to do is very difficult sometimes, and that is to listen. Love's language is not bound by state lines, national borders, walls, or curtains. The fact there are different languages is no indication prideful and destructive divisions must exist, because we divide ourselves at our own peril. Many times I think, what fools we mortals be. We dilly-dally for years over things that can be fixed. But we're looking the other way these days. And I am mightily afraid. You see, the language of God is love. My little Sunday school paper told me so when I was 7 years old. And when we learn to speak that language with a more certain tongue, the evidence will become apparent. Unitarian Universalists certainly don't speak the same language Our backgrounds are varied. Our belief systems and politics don't always jibe. Therefore, as our invocation says, we seek the truth with understanding and help one another. We have our own version of Pentecost. I mentioned the miraculous and mystery earlier. Isn't that in part what we do when we gather here on Sunday? Worship the mystery. Certainly we don't know everything, that's for sure. What Christianity and other religions refer to as God's grace is a mystery. We may use other words for it. I'm sure you probably do. We may not even use a God word to express this. However, part of the mystery lies in that it is a gift. And the way we receive it is by speaking and in part learning the language of love. This from Robbie Walsh, the retired minister of Duxbury, Massachusetts, native of Kingsport, came into Unitarian Universalism through Holston Valley Church. He says, I heard the second Brandenburg Concerto played in honor of Bach's 300th birthday, and I was swept away. I remembered a story about the people who send messages into outer space. Someone suggested sending a piece by Bach. The reply was, but that would be bragging. Some people say we get what we deserve in this life, but I don't believe it. We certainly don't deserve Bach. What have I done to deserve the second Brandenburg Concerto? I have not been kind enough. I have not done enough justice. I have not loved my neighbor or myself sufficiently. I have not praised God enough to have earned a gift like this. Life is a gift we have not earned and for which we cannot pay. There is no necessity that there be a universe, no inevitability about a world moving toward life and then self-consciousness. There might have been nothing at all. And so, since we have not earned Bach, or crocuses, or lovers, the best we can do is to express our gratitude for the undeserved gifts and do our share of the work of creation.